listener production.
Hello, Natarsha Belling with you, and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. So, how do we fix the housing crisis? And is the great Australian dream of owning a home finally over? Today in this special election edition, we unpack the federal government's policies to address the housing and rental crisis that is crippling millions of Australians. The Albanese government has had 3 years to make a difference and hasn't met some of its key housing targets. Today, Federal Housing Minister Clare joins us, admitting while there is no silver bullet, fixing supply is the key to turning around a crisis that's been decades in the making. Minister, thanks so much for joining us. I want to start this chat with a really tough question up front. Do you believe the great Australian dream of owning a home is over?
Absolutely not, Tash. And I will not engage in a housing debate where we make that concession. I think what we've seen is a 40-year-old crisis in our country tumble across the tipping point, where today we've got a generation of young people growing up in Australia who feel that home ownership is not going to happen for them. The work that our government has done over the last 3 years and what we want to do over the next 3 years is all about shifting the tide on this. And we've got policies that we've announced this election that are directly targeted at those young people to say the government wants to back you in to get into a home of your own. We want you to pay off your own mortgage, not someone else's.
So, Minister, you mentioned there that you want to turn the tide here, and this is a problem that's been occurring over decades. What do you think, I know this is the multi-million-dollar question, what do you think is behind where we are right now in this housing crisis?
I'm really glad you've asked that, Tash, because it's a question I get asked very infrequently. And it really goes to the heart of why do we have such intractable problems with housing in our country? And there is actually a very simple answer. This is a 40-year-old crisis. If we go back to 1980, we can see incomes and house prices start to diverge as we see housing become more unaffordable. And that goes all the way to 2000, and then in the year 2000 starts an inflection point again, and then basically things have gotten worse since then. The fundamental thing that is wrong is that we have a housing shortage. For 40 years, our country has not been building enough homes. So for everyone who is listening, the housing difficulties that they're facing, whether it's they don't have any negotiating power with their landlord, whether it's house prices are rising too quickly, or even that growing share of homelessness that we see in all our suburbs, it all comes back to the fact that we do not have enough houses right now in Australia. And therefore, the only real long-term answer to this is that we need to build more housing more quickly.
So in regards to building this, we all know supply is the issue. I think the majority of Australians would say, this is great, let's build more homes. But as the housing minister, you would understand putting up, and I'm not alleging that there's dodgy developers, but putting up housing without the correct plans and the correct infrastructure and actually targeting the populations that are exploding and the suburbs, that's never going to fix the supply problem. So how as a government are you looking at strategic planning to where to build those homes and to make sure the right infrastructure is around them? I'm talking about schools, I'm talking about public transport that's reliable and affordable, and also making sure this isn't a green light for developers to build shoddy apartments and shoddy homes.
Yeah, so it's a really important question again, because when you talk to people about housing, everyone understands there's a housing crisis. Most people get that we need to build more homes, but people are really concerned about the quality of development and making sure that people who are living, around the country get good amenities and that great Australian experience. So this is something the government takes really seriously. During our first term, the Prime Minister sat down with the state and territory leaders, and all of them agreed we've got a serious chronic problem with housing. We're going to work together as state and federal governments to try to build 1.2 million homes around the country that are well located. So the work that we're doing at the moment with the states is not just about spraying housing around everywhere. There's actually really strict conditions on what that new kind of housing needs to, sort of conditions that it needs to meet in terms of the quality of the build. But importantly, we're trying to build more of all kinds of housing, not just housing in the outer suburbs where you're likely to find a bit of catch-up work on the amenities end, but also trying to build more medium density housing in those areas of our cities where you've got great schools, great parks, local public pools, and all those things that most Australians want in their location of choice.
Minister, 1.2 million homes. When did the Prime Minister sit down with state and territory leaders and put that target in place? And when he did do that, how many of those 1.2 million homes or apartments or buildings have been built?
So we are in the first year of the 5-year plan to build 1.2 million homes. So this effectively started, the clock started on July 1 last year, and we need to build more homes more quickly. And we're working to bring that online at the moment. So we need to improve our capacity in order to meet the 1.2 million target. And it's going to be really challenging for the country to do it. What I would just say is that we do need to have a target. And one of the issues with the Liberals is they're saying, lower the ambition, we're not going to have a target, we're not going to strive for anything. This is a coalescing target that we're using to get states and territories and indeed local government to step up and work together on getting close to this 1.2 million.
So how many homes have been built in that, say, that would have been a 6-month period, correct, till about now? Is that right?
So, I mean, the ABS, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, doesn't release statistics that allow me to give you a figure as of today, but it's probably in the order of about 140,000 built since the clock started ticking, and we haven't got through that first year. So that's kind of where we are today. A lot of the work that our government is doing at the moment is about trying to bring more supply on more quickly. So just to be clear with you, we've got a $43 billion agenda, and at the heart of that agenda is building more homes. $32 billion of it is building more houses around the country, and in particular trying to fix our shortfall of social and affordable housing.
During last night's election debate, I noticed for probably the first time in quite some time, the phrase capital gains tax was mentioned, or negative gearing, those phrases. There is a school of thought that there are a lot of quite wealthy people that have got 6 or 7 investment properties that are using that for a tax advantage, and that may be pricing a lot of other Australians out of the housing market. Would Labor like to change negative gearing or capital gains tax? Is that something you have to look at?
No, it's not. And it's not part of our plan. And I want to bring you back to just the real problem that we're trying to solve here. There's a lot of sort of distractions in the housing debate. The fundamental issue is that we're not building enough homes more quickly. And our focus is building supply, because that is actually the only long-term answer to this problem. There are tax concession arguments. There are other things in the debate here that are sort of swirling around. But the bottom line is we've got to build more homes more quickly. And that's where our government's chosen to focus.
But Minister, in regards to a lot of those people that went into investment properties, if they weren't able to get tax concessions, would that free up some more established homes and established apartments for other Australians to purchase, maybe at a reduced price?
Well, I think the concern, Tash, is that those homes may not have been built. So what we're talking about here is a supply problem. And whatever anyone is telling you about housing, this is the simple truth. We haven't been building enough homes for 40 years. And the only answer for us addressing the needs of Australians is to make sure that we're bringing more supply online. So we've got a $43 billion agenda. $32 billion of that is targeted at building more homes more quickly, because the more housing we have, the more affordable housing we have for our citizens.
Minister, can I give you an example? I'm based in Sydney, and a great example that I look at, and we have an absolute supply issue in Sydney, one of our biggest cities in the country, or if the biggest. And there is a very interesting road that used to be very, very populated, Parramatta Road, on the way out to the Great Western Highway, which used to be a thoroughfare, thriving local businesses. If you've been along that road recently, there are a lot of empty old buildings. It looks completely decimated from a local business point of view. And the first thing a friend of mine said to me is, when they're talking about affordable housing and building great housing, social housing, why would they not develop great apartments along Parramatta Road? A number of people would say there doesn't seem to be a lot of planning in building these homes for the future in the right places. Is that something you would agree with?
Well, what I can tell you is that the government is going to change some of those dynamics in a second term. So, one of the big announcements that Prime Minister Albanese has made during the course of the campaign is that we're going to go really all in on trying to help first home buyers. And we're going to do that by offering young people the opportunity to get in with a 5% deposit. But the second thing we're going to do is actually the government is going to do something that's never happened before, and that is work directly with state governments to build 100,000 homes that are exclusively reserved for first home buyers. Now, the reason I raise that in the context of the particular area that you're talking about is that the reason those developments are probably not proceeding is because it is not economic for them to do so. What I mean is that the development cost of building on those sites is probably higher than first home buyers are actually able to pay. And this is where the government is going to be able to assist. I'm not making any commitments about that specific location,
No.
but in locations like that around the country where we've got great amenities, but developers can't make the dollars stack up, the government can come in and make those developments happen. And we're going to do that in a second term on the proviso that those homes are only sold to first home buyers. So we're doing two important things here: building supply, building new homes in places that really should have better density of housing, and making sure that those young people who have, copped it really bad with housing are the ones that get first dibs on those properties.
There was a great article on the growing number of apartments and buildings across Sydney and across Australia that have defects. If the government jumps on board with helping first home buyers and they're involved in a development that then is littered with defects, and that person then has to pay for those defects and, all of the issues and legal issues involved in that, where does that leave that first home buyer that goes in with the state government or the federal government? Are the governments liable to help pay for those issues if there are defects or structural problems found later?
Look, I mean, I think that depends a little bit on the structure that's used from a site to site perspective, Tash. So I probably can't give you a kind of global answer for that. But what I would say is, most of housing in Australia is run, owned, managed by the private sector. Actually, when you look at global examples, the government has been very minimally involved in Australia in providing housing for our citizens. And that really sets us apart, and it has created a lot of the issues that we see today. So actually what we're talking about here is the government really rolling up its sleeves and getting much more involved in the building of homes. And that gives us much more power about the quality of builds, about their environmental standards, about, the way that we use these apartments in the giving them not just apartments, but dwellings for people who need a new home. So this policy offering that the government has lots of merit. It's a really massive idea and a huge intervention in a market that desperately needs a kind of good player with only the public interest at heart, which government will be in this instance.
Claire, you're also the Minister for Homelessness, and I think it's great the government actually has a minister for this huge social issue that affects so many people across our country. Does it still surprise you and sadden you greatly that in 2025 we have so many people in our country that are homeless?
Oh, absolutely, Tash. I mean, when these are the things that get me out of bed every morning. And I live in suburban Melbourne, in southeast Melbourne. I'm at home right now. I can see rising homelessness in my suburb. This is not a problem that's confined to a small number of people who have got intractable other issues. I spend a lot of my time talking to our fastest growing cohort of people into homelessness, which is older women, older Australian women. So this is a massive motivator for me in my job. And I want to tell you just what the government, why do we have a rising homelessness problem? Because we have a housing shortage, but we have a very particular acute problem in social and affordable housing. That's where the government basically comes in and says, this community of people, we can't leave them to just fend for themselves in the private rental market. The government should have a role in housing them. And so our government is stepping up and building 55,000 social and affordable homes over the coming 5 years. And if I can just share a quick story with you, I was in Adelaide last week and I met an older woman who has a very familiar story. She was in her 60s. She'd had spent her life raising her kids. She'd gone through a relationship breakdown. She had no property, no super, and she was in her 60s, an Australian woman ringing around homelessness organisations because she was about to get kicked out of her rental. Now, she found her way into a home that's been provided and funded by our government, and it has changed her entire life. And not just she's safe, she's secure, not just her life, but the life of her 3 daughters who are spending all of their time worrying about what are we going to do about mum. We're going to do that 55,000 more times. Like, so much of the housing debate gets into facts and figures and dates and all the rest of it, which is perfectly legitimate. But remember, this is not just about bricks and mortar. This is about how we provide safety and security for every person in our country.
And as we know, the homelessness crisis does not discriminate. Clare, in regards to, I'm glad you brought up the rental crisis, because there's been a lot of focus during this housing debate on building, owning homes, trying to get onto the property ladder. But there is also a rental crisis, a whole generation of Australians, actually lots of Australians of all different ages, that now will be permanent renters. What's the government doing to support renting?
Yeah, so really, really important question. I'm so glad you asked it. So let me run through a few things quickly. The first thing is the housing shortage I spoke to you about. This is actually what is making life difficult for renters. The reason that rents are going up too quickly, the reason that renters have no power or not enough power in dealing with their landlords is because there aren't enough homes. The rental vacancy rate across our country is fractionally low. And it just means that you don't have an equal power balance between landlords and renters. And the way to fix that long term is the same as with house prices. We've got to build more homes more quickly. But don't worry, we're not making renters wait until we build our way out of this. There's a lot else on the table. So during the course of this term, we've lifted Commonwealth rent assistance by 45%. That's 1 million households around the country who receive that payment who are getting 45% more. We're also building more rental properties. So a tax change that we made this term will bring about 80,000 new rental properties online. We worked with the states to build something called a better deal for renters. So every state and territory committed to change their tenancy laws to provide better protections for renters, things like outlawing no-fault evictions. And the final thing I just want to mention is that I want to offer every possible opportunity for people who are renting right now to get into home ownership if they can in any world do it. And that's why this 5% deposit program that the government has put in place is really important. This is about making sure that young people actually are paying off their own mortgage, not someone else's. And that's something that we'll implement in a second term if we get elected.
Minister, finally today, I want to ask you a question. Many Australians will feel incredibly disheartened at the moment. There is no light at the end of the tunnel if they're really struggling with finding affordable housing at the moment. What message can you give Australians right now that everything's going to be okay and they can have the dream of owning a home or having safe and secure housing?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the first thing I would say is that I don't think politicians should go around pretending that there's a quick fix or a silver bullet to this. This has been a 40-year-old crisis for a reason. It's incredibly complicated. It's very difficult, and it will require government to solve a bunch of problems that we haven't been able to solve for 40 years. So I don't want to come on here and tell everyone that I'm single-handedly going to fix all of this in the next 3 years, and I think to do so would be really disingenuous and wrong. What I can tell your listeners and your viewers is that for the first time in my living memory, we're having a very robust political debate about housing for the first time. And what our government has on the table is genuinely nation-shaping housing reform. We need to build more homes, and we have a $32 billion agenda to do that. We've got to help renters, and we really seriously want to help people get into home ownership. And where, our government is doing things that no Commonwealth government has ever done before, simply because we need a bold, ambitious agenda here that matches the size of this problem for our country. And I'd say that we've hit that mark. But what we need now, in my view, very strongly, is that we need the Labor government to get elected, because what the Australian people need is a government that is going to get out of bed every morning and just grindingly go through all these problems, implement the billions of dollars of spending that I've talked about, and we will come out the other end with a different approach to housing in our country. But it is hard yakka. And I want people, who are listening to know, like, my commitment to this is very genuine. I got into politics to try to help people, and I reckon this is the biggest social and economic problem that we confront, and it's genuinely a privilege for me to be able to work on this so hard for the people I represent.
Minister, we really appreciate you joining us today. Thanks so much.
Great. Thanks, Tash. Really appreciate your time.
And that was Federal Housing Minister Clare O'Neil. And that's it for this special election edition of The Briefing. We'd love to know your thoughts on our chat. Let us know by hitting us up on our socials, including Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. Or if you're listening on Spotify, leave us a comment. Or if you're on Apple, write us a review. We would love hearing from you. And don't forget, we'll be back in your feeds tomorrow morning from 6 a.m. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company.